The American Adoption Congress presents the 13th International Conference, April 11th to the 14th, 1991, in Garden Grove, California. This is program number G151, tape 6A.
You found yourself in the right room. I'm Dr. MacArthur, and I'm a little tied down here, but we'll see if I've got some freedom to pace back and forth. First of all, as you can see from the brochure, I'm a clinical psychologist with a specialty in adoption. I come by that interest, honestly, because I'm an adoptive mom. I'm also a writer, and I've written in the field for children for a number of years, and have a manuscript almost ready to go called The Changing Nature of Adoption. I've been writing it for about a decade. It's gone through a lot of changes, and I'd like to share some of the thinking with you that's happened through the course of writing and reworking and writing this book. First of all, can we close the doors? I wasn't sure whether we could. Thank you. Let me tell you so that you can remind me that when you are talking, I've been asked to repeat whatever it is that you're saying so that it will be picked up on the recording. I tend to get involved in conversations with people if I forget, just give me some sign that I'm supposed to be repeating what you're saying. I'd like to know a little bit about who I'm talking to today. You do not need to identify yourself if you don't wish to. But if you don't mind, I would be interested in knowing how many adoptive couples I have here today, adoptive parents. Figured this one would draw a pretty good smattering, okay? How many professionals in the field do I have? Oh, wow, a lot of overlap, too. Any birth moms? Great. Okay. Any adoptees? Good. All right. We've got a representation from all the way around, which means we won't get away with saying anything that's wrong without being challenged, given our directions this morning. It is a well-known fact that adoption cures childlessness, but it does not cure infertility, and I'm sure you are all aware of that, especially those of you who are adoptive parents, at a very deep level. It's a very obvious statement, but I think it's one that needs to be said over and over again. What do we really mean by the word infertility? I think that's important for us to define today. I mean a lot of things by the word infertility. I think that this includes the inability to conceive. It includes a failed pregnancy. It includes miscarriages that never result in the birth of a child. It includes stillbirth or the death of a child. It also includes your deciding not to get pregnant because one of the parties may have a genetic disease that you don't wish to transmit onto the next generation. In other words, I'm lumping together all of those things that come about that say it's not wise, or you can't, or you choose not to conceive your own child or to participate in that. Have I left out any? I've talked to an adoptive mom who is an adoptive mom when she doesn't have an infertility problem and resents having people assume that she does. I think most of us who are adoptive parents have experienced one of those. To quote Sharon Kaplan, who you heard speak really poignantly this morning, she and I are good friends and have worked together for some time. She calls infertility one of life's greatest blows. There is no end to the loss, no closure to the loss experience. Loss in adoption is not a single occurrence. Instead, there is the initial identifiable loss and innumerable secondary sub-losses. I think another way to say that is we have many, many times in which we are reminded of that original problem. Now, let me turn to you for a minute to talk about what some of those circumstances might be. We all know about the basic loss that we've all had to come to terms with in one way or another. And I think that the situation that you end up with when you have an infertility problem, it's a situation that really is a special needs one. And you're going to understand more what I mean about that as we go ahead. It requires a special care that makes adoption very different from the normal parenting experience right from the very word go. If you are willing to accept the specialness of the special circumstances, I think you can indeed feel that you have been on a special journey that you can be very proud of. What I'm talking about is creating a reasonable substitute for not being able to have your own baby. There is no replacing it, but there is a way, I think, to tackle the problem so that you feel pretty proud of what the outcome is. Now, if I can turn to you for a minute, I have some examples here, but I'm sure yours are even more interesting. In terms of, under what circumstances do you still feel the fact that there was or is presently an infertility problem?
Do you want hot off the press?
Hot off the press. Great, that's what I need.
It has to do with the birth of my first grandchild.
Mm-hmm.
And it's opened up all the lack of entitlement, and this is not my real grandchild and all of that. And real feelings of not being as grandmother as the other grandmother, not having the same rights as the other grandmother, no right to claim time with the child, that sort of thing.
Oh, there's a real good one.
It's awful.
It's
I hate it.
awful. Your adoptee has had her own child.
His own child.
His own child, right. Okay, that's a really good example. That one hurts. Can you give me some other examples? Time when you are reminded that you have not been able to have your own child. Yes.
Each time that I see a newborn, it's almost like it's not even a brain cognitive experience. There's like a body knowing.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I bet everybody in this room has become acquainted with that one. Another one? Yes.
When you talk to your child about adoption.
Yeah, then you really feel it. And especially if the child is feeling some pain in the conversation, and you think, if only I'd been able to give birth to this child wouldn't hurt right now as much as he hurts or she hurts. Yeah, yes.
I know as an adoptee, when I was going through my search, my mother became so terribly distressed, and I felt like it was a recreation of the infertility, a reminder to her of that horrid pain.
Yeah, that's a really good example. When your adoptee searches, you're reminded again that you didn't give birth to that child. Yes. Yep.
I think since your description of infertility was so broad, it made me think that in my situation, losing a child, I could never have another child because the pain was so acute, even though I wanted children, and in that sense I felt, I mean, that's sort of what prompted me to come to this particular, because I feel in that sense I've been childless even though I have the birth child.
I see.
And I've never
Okay.
been allowed myself to enter into the possibility of having a child even though I could, because the pain is so acute from that original loss.
The trauma was so great, it's precluded the option of your becoming pregnant again.
I'm not alone. I heard today that a third of birth mothers are in that situation.
Yeah, I think we have a fair number of adoptees who, in closed adoptions, need to find out what it feels like to be adopted, and so they end up recreating what they thought their mother went through by becoming a birth mother at a young age and then relinquishing the child for adoption because they're not old enough or ready in life to take on the parenting for 18 years. And then they end up with a secondary infertility or an unexplained infertility. They're not able to get pregnant themselves. They then adopt and visit all 3 members of the adoption triangle. And one of the reasons that happens is that the pain is so acute about what you have to deal with. And yes, that's another option I should add to the list. And I think that also happens for adoptive couples who receive an adoptee and then have to relinquish it and give it back to the birth mother, and that the pain is so strong that they don't get back up again to adopt again. It's just too much. Are there other instances where you are suddenly confronted with infertility? Yes.
The child doesn't look like you.
When the child doesn't look like you, yes, which is every day. Any others? Yeah.
Probably heightened fears of loss of your adopted child and children, that having dealt with that loss, that you're kind of set up to expect them to be taken away from you through death, accident, whatever.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably part of what your adoptive mom was feeling. By the way, you should know that I have some eye problems, so it's going to be hard for you to tell when I'm looking at you, and if you can't tell, I'll try and describe your clothing or something. When I'm looking at you, it looks like I'm looking 2 over and 1 to the left, and we'll just have to wrestle with that as the day goes on, but persevere. I'm trying to make contact with you the best way I can. Here are some of the examples that I had, and I think you've touched on a number of them. When a baby is first born, when your friends have babies and you wish you could see the delivery, just even to get a chance to see somebody else's baby being born. When you see a woman enjoying a pregnancy, here's an example you've given. When you look at your adoptee in the mirror with you and wish you could say, this child came from within me. That's one of the reasons I love him or her so much. When your child is suffering from adoption pain and you wish that you could be the only mother so they wouldn't have to have that pain, or the only father, that one comes up really often. And you've come up with this example when your child looks different from you and people repeatedly ask where your child came from. Constant reminder, constant reminder. If you are trying to do some kind of openness in adoption, you face your infertility every time the adoptee has to separate from a visit with birth family. Those are painful moments. When you watch the birth family drive away and you watch the adoptee's face and you know that your infertility is part of why that's all happening. I don't know how many of you have come in contact with Sharon Kaplan's 7 core issues of adoption. Can I have some hands on those of you? Okay, about half of you. I'm going to go over that fairly quickly today because it gives us a kind of a backdrop for the next model that I'm going to present to you in more detail. There's a fair amount of parallel. The 7 core issues for adoption for each member of the adoption triangle, Sharon Kaplan calls loss, rejection, guilt, and shame, grief, identity, intimacy, mastery, and control.
Go over those again, please.
Yeah, I'm going to go over them one at a time so you can pick up on it. She talks about these being the universal lifelong issues that any member of the adoption triangle deals with. Loss is the center of the wheel. Everyone in adoption has a loss before they can gain. Adoptee loses birth family loses adoptee, adoptive couple loses the ability to have their own child. So everybody comes together because of that center of the wheel, which is loss. Rejection is the second one. The adoptive couple may feel rejected by their body or by God. We had a lot of people who came to us, true believers who came to us and said, you seem like such nice people. I just can't figure out what you did wrong. And that's why we couldn't get get pregnant, or by the adoptee who is searching for a birth family. Many people search and don't get to find, and that's another loss. And as you had mentioned, that it's easy to kind of fall into binding the adoptee tighter to you, or not letting the adoptee get very close to you because you're afraid of experiencing that center of the wheel again, that loss. It's been so painful. I think guilt and shame is one of the things that keeps adoption secret. You know, we don't have to tell anybody. You don't have to tell if you don't want to. It's not something you could be proud of. And that adoptive parents feel some shame and guilt that they were not able to create their own child. An adoptee certainly feels shame and guilt for not staying with their own family. And a birth mother feels tremendous, and a birth father, shame and guilt for not being in a position to raise the child. Those feelings visit you for the rest of your life, sometimes more intensely than others. Grief is a real hard one for adoptees, for any member of the adoption triangle, because there is no really formal rituals to deal with the loss. There is no service for a baby you can't have. A birth mother doesn't have any service for a child that she has relinquished. She doesn't gather together with family members. The adoptee doesn't have any way to publicly or formally grieve the loss of their birth parents. So that everybody has to cope with adoption without that kind of formal support service that exists with a funeral or some kind of a service that acknowledges the loss publicly. They spoke this morning about the identity issues that are common for all of us. It's hard to feel like you're really the mother of your kid when your kid came from another family. And it's hard to feel like you were the mother of your kid when your kid left your family. And it's hard to feel when you're an adoptee that you have an identity that belongs in either place. You feel like you're half here and half there. You're not really a MacArthur, and you're not really a Smith, and you're not really a Jones, but you're half a Jones and half a MacArthur. And that creates an identity issue that I think is one that adoptees struggle with for a long time. I think intimacy is a real important one, too, because having experienced loss at that center of the wheel, it's a little bit harder to take that risk, to be truly intimate, to face that kind of loss again. And all members of the adoption triangle have to struggle with bonding and attachment and clinging and binding and separating and acting out and being over-adaptive, which all have to do with how they choose to be intimate with one another, considering that they've already been through a major trauma. The last one Sharon mentions is mastery and control. One of the things that was difficult for me as an adoptive mother was I was born in the East Coast with a fair amount of reasonable financial advantage, and I was able to go to school where I wanted, and I knew I could get a PhD, and I got good grades, and life was relatively within my control until I found out I couldn't make a baby, and there was a real reason for that. Then suddenly life was out of my control in a way that had never been before, and it was a very humbling experience for me. In retrospect, I think it was badly needed, but I think that we can turn each one of these 7 core issues into growth and mastery and survival skills, but that doesn't cancel out the fact that it hurts, and that you have to be able to survive the hurt and feel it when it comes. The other thing about the 7 core issues is they tend to visit you suddenly. And you're driving down the street, or you're walking in the Galleria, and there is a brand new infant, and suddenly you're confronted with one of the 7 core issues. Maybe you aren't. Maybe you got 2 of them. And there's an unpredictability in which these issues tend to kind of just surface suddenly. Your adoptee comes into the house, asks for some juice and cookies, sits down at the dining room table and says to you, Mom, I'm ready to search for my birth mom. And 1 minute it isn't there, and the next minute it's there. So there's a lot of work to do to be an adoptive couple or a birth mom or a birth dad or an adoptee. I think that adoptive couples especially, and I'm going to be gearing this presentation a little bit more to adoptive couples because they're the ones who are actually dealing with the infertility, though this may be true for some birth moms too. But so in some cases I'm going to be talking a little bit more about adoptive couples, but I don't mean to be leaving out the ways in which it's applicable to all of the rest of you. I think that as adoptive couples, if we're not aware of these feelings, we can do some unintentional, I underline unintentional, damage to our relationship with our adoptees. It's too easy to treat adoptees as a gift. As one of my patients recently said to me, I never thought I was a person. I always thought I was a package, and I had to stay neatly wrapped up and keep my bow from getting damaged. Otherwise, I'd get thrown away. And when she found her birth father, her first words to me in the next hour were, you know what? I've been born. Do I look different? And she didn't feel like a package so much anymore. But it's too easy for us to treat an adoptee as a gift, as a something chosen, as a something not born, or to let whatever fantasy we had of what our own child would be like, sneak into that relationship in a way that puts an adoptee in an impossible bind to be somebody different from the person they're really meant to be. I think that focusing on the grief work or resolving these issues, being willing to struggle with them, with this new model I'm going to present to you, will open the door for you to have a maximal relationship with your adoptee and to let them be the person that they were born into this world to be, whether that may be different from who you are or somewhat the same. I think that when you reach that point of deciding that you're not going to do any more tests or surgeries or medications or operations, and you decide to give up trying to make your own baby, and you turn to another and you say, I'm not going to try and do that anymore. Generally, I've found from my clinical practice, and I've seen a lot of adoption triangle members over the years now, that it takes somewhere from 6 months to a year and a half to grieve the loss of being able to have your own child before you're really ready to turn to adoption as a different parenting experience. I have patients who have well-meaning friends who come to them as soon as they learn of the infertility and start bringing them announcements of international adoptions and telephone numbers from the yellow pages here and there in an effort to be helpful. And they're a little surprised when the adoptive couple just doesn't respond very much. Well, the reason they're not responding very much is because they're grieving. And they're grieving something they can't have, and they have to be able to do that enough to withdraw the energy from it, to turn to something else, which is gratifying in its own and very different way. Now, one of the things we have to deal with here, it's such a complicated thing, and I think we saw that this morning, but that some adoptive couples have to deal with a particular reason for their infertility that leaves them with strong feelings to resolve. Let me give you some examples, and you may wish to add some more, you may wish not to, but some people can't make a baby anymore because of they had a kind of a birth control pill that we later found out caused damage and shouldn't have been used. Some had unnecessary surgeries or medical procedures that did more damage than it did good. Some have an unexplained infertility, perhaps the hardest kind of infertility to deal with, because you've been through all of the tests and all these wise and knowledgeable people look at you and say, there's nothing wrong, dear. Go take your vacation in Hawaii, and the shame and the guilt of not being able to procreate feels a whole lot stronger for those people. I think that the profession of psychology has come forward with some staggering literature in the last year and a half about sexual abuse. And they're saying that 1 out of 2, some books say 1 out of 3, women by the age of 18 have been sexually abused by a member of their extended family. 1 out of 7 men. 1 out of 5 women can't make a baby. One wonders what the correlation is between the two. And for some adoptive couples, there is known sexual abuse that created the infertility problem. That makes a double job for these people to deal with. They have to resolve the abuse, resolve the infertility, and go on to do a different kind of parenting. That's a real lifelong job. And then there's the people who can get pregnant but choose not to because of the high risk of passing on a genetic illness to their child that they don't want them to have. And that requires putting aside your own wishes, putting the child before you in a very big way. There's an interesting book that's come out in the last year or so by Suzanne and Sidney Simon that was really helpful to me in my whole journey through writing this latest book called The Changing Nature of Adoption. They have created 6 stages of healing. And by that term, I mean it's a very popular term in the self-help literature, but it is dealing with the unresolved feelings about someone who is still alive, basically.
6 stages of what? I'm sorry?
Healing. Which, if you make it through, I think it's 6 stages. If you make it all the way through, they feel like you are left in a position of being able to forgive. What happened to you? What happened that makes it impossible for you to have a baby? Yes, it's right there in the bibliography. I'm used to having a board or something here, but I don't today. What I'm going to propose to you today is that the adoptive couple's task is to make it through those 6 stages themselves in regard to their own infertility or inability to conceive. And then, in the process of doing that, they're in a position to open up the adoption enough for their adoptee to make it through the 6 stages themselves. So you're going to see a parallel process here in which the adoptive couple does it first and then is in a position to help the adoptee. When we look at forgiveness, I'm not talking about the word in terms of a religious sense, though one certainly can apply that definition to it too. Forgiveness in this case is letting go of the intense emotions attached to incidents from our past. Forgiveness is recognizing that we no longer need our grudges and resentments, our hatred and our self-pity. Forgiveness is no longer wanting to punish the people who may have hurt us. Forgiveness is accepting that nothing we do to punish them will heal us. So another word for it is resolution. To kind of go back and visit what happened, visit how it felt, visit the feelings that you have about it. And they have a way of processing it through these 6 stages that has been very, very helpful to a number of people in terms of handling their infertility and handling the adoption issues that come down the pike 6 or 7 years later, sometimes earlier than that. The first stage is denial. That one we all know well. That's when this is a stage in which we attempt to play down the impact or importance of painful past experiences and bury our thoughts and feelings about these experiences. That's okay, I didn't really want to be pregnant anyway, I was afraid of childbirth. I don't have to experience labor. It'll be okay. I can love an adoptee as much as I would love my own child. I never had a fantasy of what my child would look at. Those kinds of statements that say, no problem, don't need to deal with this. And that's a stage. Each one of these stages are a valid part of the process. Some of them are not very flattering, but they're stages that we need to move through. And as I describe these stages, it isn't that you start with one and go through to 6, but you start with denial and maybe jump up to another one and then go back to denial or back to self-blame and up to victim and back to, and you can go back and forth in them for many years, each time learning a little bit more about your own feelings about what happened to you, which puts you in a better position to help your child with whatever happened to them. Self-blame is the second stage. In the self-blame stage, you basically say, yeah, I guess something happened, but obviously it was my fault. It's a stage in which you try and explain what happened by assuming that we're somehow responsible for the injuries and the injustices we may have suffered. And unfortunately, this self-blame stage, if you get stuck in it, it really decimates your self-esteem. You are a bad person. You deserved the bad thing that happened to you. What you don't want to do is get stuck in any one of these stages, except maybe the last two. And many people who are stuck in the self-blame stage work overtime to convince themselves that they would not have been hurt if only they had been different or had done things differently. Now, unfortunately, we have many adoptees, I think, who get stuck in the self-blame stage because their parents tell them they're adopted when they're around 3 or 4, which is developmentally the magic years. Those are the years in which you think that you could cause something to happen. If you even think about it and it happens, it's your fault because you thought about it. Or parents are all powerful and all perfect, and if something happened out of the ordinary, it must have been some deficit on your part that caused it to happen. In relatively closed adoptions where kids are told they were adopted at age 3 and 4, and then the issue isn't discussed again for a long time, that self-blame goes underground and stays there, decimating the self-esteem for a long time.
Could you repeat that? What happens?
Well, what happens if you tell a child around the ages of 3 or 4 is that's the stage in development of the brain in which they regard adults as all powerful and all perfect. And if anything goes wrong, it's the adoptee's fault. So that being told that you're adopted in the 3 and 4-year-old stage, if you're just told that, and then the issue really isn't discussed much anymore after that, you can send a child into the self-blame stage and leave them there for years and years and years. And then they surface as one of the 27 to 35% who go into psychiatric hospitals during the ages of 14 to 16. So you're going to tell your child about adoption when they first ask about it, and it's those magic developmental years of 3 to 4. You got to make sure that you follow up on it when they're 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and move into a more complex level of development where they can understand that parents and adults are not all powerful and they are not all perfect and they make mistakes and sometimes they can't take on something that they'd like to do.
Referring to the birth parent?
Yes. Yes. And also referring to the adoptive couple who couldn't make the baby in the right place. How come I didn't come out from inside? What's the matter with your tummy? Then there's the victim stage. That's the next stage. I mean, to summarize it briefly, that's the stage in which you wake up and you say, my God, something bad happened to me and it wasn't my fault. I had nothing to do with this. It shouldn't have happened to me and it did. In this stage, we recognize that we did not deserve or ask for the hurt that we received. We are well aware of how we were damaged by painful past experiences, so much so that we wallow in self-pity and expect little of ourselves, indulge ourselves at the expense of those around us, or lash out at everyone and anyone who crosses us. We're not going to be a victim to anybody anymore. And you get that kind of victim place that isn't very powerful, but you want the world to know you were hurt. Well, that's a valid stage to go through. We try and contain a good deal of it in the therapy office, but it spills out into the outside world some, and that's to be expected. Then there's the indignation stage. In this stage, we're angry at the people who hurt us and at the world. And we want the people who've hurt us to pay and suffer as we have. I'm a victim, and I'm really angry about it. And you should pay for that surgery I shouldn't had to have, for that birth control pill I shouldn't have been on, for that sexual abuse that I endured as a child, for that genetic illness you passed on to me and shouldn't have given me in the first place. In this stage, our tolerance is virtually non-existent. Our self-righteousness is at an all-time high. Then, with a little bit of luck, and you're going to bounce back and forth into those various stages, but a little bit of luck, you get to wake up in the survivor stage one morning. And you wake up and the sun is shining outside and you say, okay, all this happened to me. And I'm angry about it, and it did occur, but wait a minute, I'm still alive. That's the point at which an adoptive couple becomes ready to turn to adoption. I remember the day it happened to me. I remember the world was just gray for about 6 months. Then one morning I woke up and said, damn it, I can't make a baby, but I can raise one. And it took a while to get there. Finally, at this stage, we recognize that although we've indeed been hurt, we did in fact survive. Our painful past experiences took things away from us, but also gave us things as well. We became aware of our strengths and welcomed the return of our compassion, sense of humor, and interest in matters other than pain. We bask in the knowledge that all things considered, we did the best we could. Okay? And all of a sudden, you can look at little children in car seats in the back of cars and say, well, maybe I could have a car seat too someday. The last stage is integration. In this stage, we're able to acknowledge that the people who hurt us may have been doing the best they could too. And if we are more than our wounds, maybe they are too. They must be more than the inflictor of those wounds. With this knowledge, we can release them from prison and reclaim the energy we've used to keep them there. We can put the past in perspective without forgetting it, let go of the pain, and get on with our lives, unencumbered by excess emotional baggage. Now that's a statement of self-actualization, maturity, experience, all of those grown-up things we're always striving to become. But I think you can see the journey through it.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. In this stage, we are able to acknowledge that the people who hurt us may have been doing the best they could too, and that we are more than our wounds. With this knowledge, we can release them from prison and reclaim the energy we used to keep them there. We can put the past in perspective without forgetting it, not repressing it or forgetting it, but you can put it aside and go on, let go of the pain, and get on with our lives, unencumbered by the excess emotional baggage. Another way to say it is you're coming to terms with what happened. Yes?
Now, are you talking about loss in general, or are you talking about infertility with these stages?
Both.
Because if you're talking about infertility, I'm troubled here, in that endometriosis is there's not a bad guy involved. You know, where so much infertility is caused by a medical problem that nobody caused it. It just happened. And so I don't know who the bad guy, where they're going to integrate that the people who hurt us. Who are those people that hurt us?
Well, we're seriously considering the fact that endometriosis may be related to sexual abuse in many accounts.
That's a pretty big leap of faith, if you ask me. But,
You need to do a major research study on that, but there's a number of people who are real concerned about that.
Again,
And the correlation between sexual abuse and endometriosis is very, very high. But that doesn't mean that that's the only thing that causes it. Also, a trauma in childhood may cause a sufficient hormonal imbalance to cause the endometriosis. We do not have a cause for that problem yet.
That's what I'm suggesting.
We don't. We're still looking, and we're beginning to look in some new areas. Unfortunately, sexual abuse usually goes under total repression. Especially if it's severe abuse or it occurred at a young age. What's happening is that most women are not even beginning to remember an inkling of it until the late 30s and early 40s. They're going out into the world, they're dating, they're having sex, they're trying to make their babies and marry and have their families. And then the memories begin to become forward. So
you're
it's
suggesting that that a major cause of infertility ultimately is sexual abuse? She's not suggesting that?
I'm saying that's one of the possible causes.
If you have endometriosis.
If you have endometriosis. It's a possibility. I'm not saying that's the only cause, but there's a very high correlation between the two. Asherman's syndrome, also scarred uterus, especially if a child's been abused at a very young age. Yes?
And when he's talking about who would you be angry at because no one caused it, it's kind of like the grief and loss of death.
Right. Right.
It's very similar, and usually who people are angry at is God.
Well, that I
They
can
can't find the
understand. No,
culprit.
that I can
They'll
understand.
say it's God or
Right.
it's Buddha or
I mean, no,
whatever. So
that's
why-
different, though, with
It
the
might not
others.
be a person
No,
in that
agreed.
Yeah.
sense.
That makes sense.
Like,
Yeah, you don't have to
either
have
it's
somebody-
down
Yeah.
or God didn't make it right. Or,
Right. Okay.
We usually try and come up with something somewhere to put it upon so that you can work with it. And some people use God, as she said. And sometimes we have to deal with not knowing why it happened. And that's the hardest one of all because you keep thinking about it.
Or the medical profession as a whole, because
They failed you.
Yeah.
yeah, they failed you.
Right.
And oftentimes, infertile couples, I mean, you mention
Right.
an MD and they
Right.
turn beet
They're
red.
very angry.
Very angry.
Right.
Yeah. And, or even, just what you may have to work through is all of the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years of medical procedures you went through to try and make a baby first. And that may be the thing that you have to go through the victim and the self-blame and the indignation with. Okay?
Do you have a name for a study that was done on this endometriosis possibility? Are you referring? Who are you referring to when you say research?
I'm referring to a lot of conversation with colleagues at this point in which they're noting the parallel between the two. We've got 1 out of 5 women who were not able to make babies, and we've got 1 out of 2 to 1 out of 3 that have been sexually abused. You'd wonder what the crossover is and whether there is one in some cases. Now, there may or there may not be, but both of those figures are very, very high at this point. Now, the figures on sexual abuse have only come forward in the last year and a half. So it's something new for us to look at. Yeah.
In looking at these different stages of healing, I know before you said that they don't all happen in a particular order, but they're kind of constantly, is it like they're constantly occurring and you're trying, let's say as the clinician involved, or even as the person who's going through them, you're trying to sort out what the experience is at the
That's
time
right.
that you're experiencing it? And
You're trying to process, go back and visit both the experience and the feelings, the painful feelings that if otherwise defended against may limit your options in terms of being intimate with the very people that you want to be intimate with and letting people be the people that they are.
I understand the, I guess the result of the defensiveness. I guess I'm just wondering, like it says that once you arrive at the survivor stage, it seems like at that point you're somehow ready to move on. But does that mean that these other experiences don't continue to occur?
No, I think that my experience, both in my office and with my own personal life, is that I've been through all of the stages, up to integration and back to indignation again, and up to survivor and back even to denial a little bit. And that each time you visit a particular stage, obnoxious though it may be to you and the people around you, though you learn to control it, you learn a little bit more about the whole thing. And when you know enough, you stop visiting the stages again.
This is the end of side A. Please continue on side B.
At what we have to deal with and what our adoptees have to deal with when they come into our family as a result of what we've had to deal with, and a way of kind of sharing it. If you've been through the stages, it's easier to help them through the stages. Now, we need to keep going so I can give you a break too, but I think that all three members of the adoption triangle can likely make use of this model in their different ways. A birth mother has the traumatic experience of relinquishing a child to understand for the purpose of forgiving herself in many cases. She comes out feeling like she was the bad person, and working her way through these 6 stages lets her off that hook. An adoptive couple has the trauma to resolve in the form of infertility, loss of pregnancy, and in some cases the sexual abuse that caused the infertility. Both birth parents and adoptive couples have already formed groups such as Concerned United Birth Parents and Resolve and the various groups and AAC, and I think that in a way the adoptee is the one who's received the least explicit attention in terms of their need to go through the 6 stages. I think an adoptee, especially in a closed adoption, is likely to face the following well-intentioned but sometimes, wait a minute, I don't want to do that for you just yet. Let me stop that paragraph and get back here. Okay, now let's go back and visit these stages one more time and look at what happens if you get stuck in one of them and how that may affect your relationship with your adoptee. Now, at this point, I'm not intending to be accusatory for anyone. I think we all have to visit these stages, and it's impossible to be perfect adoptive parents, and our adoptees have to cope. But it's just a way of kind of pointing out what you might be dealing with and how it might be affecting the adoptee, so you can be a little more alert to some of those possible problems. I think if you adopt during the denial stage, that you may have a stronger desire for the child to look like you, and you may tend to try and deny the differences between the adoptee and the fantasy child you never had. Some people, I think, who kind of get stuck in that denial stage are the ones who find it that they want little background information about the adoptee, and that adoption is really not a topic to talk about with anybody. They really try and pretend it isn't there. And the adoptee kind of gets the feeling that they need to be this fantasy child, but they don't know what the fantasy child is, so that's an impossible bind for the child to be in. I think the self-blame stage, if you get stuck in that one for a long period, it's kind of like the Kubler-Ross bargaining stage. There are some adoptive couples who try adoption because they've heard the statistic that if you adopt, then you can have a baby. And so it's sort of a bargaining. There must be something wrong with me, but I'll do this. And once I do this, then I should be able to have a baby of my own. And then the adoptee gets resented if the consequent pregnancy doesn't happen. And that's a terrible load for an adoptee to carry. The indignation stage is one I've seen adoptive parents caught in, and I've seen adoptees caught in it too. And that's the stage where you have difficulty bonding because of the anger that this child is not yours. And the anger just stays there all the time, and the child feels the anger. I think if you get to the survivor stage and can stay there for a reasonable length of time, you're probably in the best shape to allow openness into the adoption. But at that point, you're ready to do some of the things that were kind of mandated to us this morning, and that is to create that extended kinship family. It's easier to do that if you've reached the survivor stage in terms of your own feelings. If you reach the integration stage, I think then that you're probably in the best position to consider maybe not only openness in adoption, but maybe even a cooperative adoption. Because you've really come to terms with the fact that your birth mom did the best she could, and you did the best you could, and you've grown a lot since that time, and you have something in common to share. I think if we make our way through these Simon 6 stages, the goals then become to minimize the hurt and to feel whole and peaceful within yourself and within your family. To use the creativity and the resolution to make a difference by giving our adoptees a chance to make their way through the Simon's 6 stages and the 7 core issues with our help. And 3, you're able to join forces with other members of your adoption triangle to provide the clarification and reunion that is often an invaluable part of the adoptee's total sense of self. I think being able to make your own baby is one of the ways to make a difference in this world. Being able to provide your adoptee with that kinship extended family is another way to make a difference. Now, there are some myths that Sharon Kaplan says you have to give up in order to do this kinship extended family. First of all, you've got to give up that myth that your adoptee's birth mother does not care anymore, will forget her adoptee completely, and doesn't want to be bothered. There are a couple of birth mothers that say no to searching, but it's usually not because they don't want to be bothered. It's because they can't handle the pain of the reunion. The second myth you have to be able to give up is that secrecy about birth family is necessary to protect the psychological health of the adoptee. I contend that that is not true, and instead the adoptee needs access to the information about their roots and their genealogy. And the third myth you have to give up is if the adoptee loves his or her adoptive family, he or she will not need to search. I think we have a fair number of adoptive couples out there who are trying their darndest, having been through numerous evaluations by organizations and agencies and birth mothers and lawyers and social workers, and gotten the stamp of approval of being able to parent. And they set themselves up to provide a perfect enough home so that their adoptee never misses their birth family. And I don't think that's really possible. I don't think it's possible to do perfect parenting, even if it's an adoptee or just a normal parenting experience. I think that the loss that an adoptee has had to face in terms of leaving their birth family is a loss that never can be replaced with perfect parenting. I think they're separate, distinct events and have to be handled differently. So what I'm going to propose to you instead is that instead of trying to do that impossible task, that we look at the ways in which you can help your adoptee to make it through these 6 stages. If you do that, you won't look like a perfect parent, because sometimes your adoptee may be upset, or they may be angry, or they may be feeling like a victim, or they may be feeling the self-blame stage, or they may be feeling the indignation stage, or they may reach the survivor stage. And that society on the outside may look at you some of the time and say, well, aren't you providing a good enough home so that your kid never thinks about her birth family? And we get a lot of those subtle or not so subtle questions. Now, I think once you've grieved the loss enough, and it takes a year to a year and a half, it took my husband and I a year to make it out to adoption. There are then 10 steps that you go through to move from the grief of infertility to the openness of adoption. I'm going to review those briefly with you, then we'll take a 5-minute break and go on to the second half of the presentation, in which I'm going to give you some concrete examples from an adoptive family. Where a young child between the ages of 3 and 7 visits these different stages and the dialogues that went on between the adoptive parents and the birth parents and the adoptee. So I'm going to bring it right down into real life and give you some snatches from this next book called The Changing Nature of Adoption. And then we'll leave some time for you to react to that. First of all, we've been talking about making it through these stages far enough so that you can accept the infertility and grieve the loss of having your own baby. It's a hard loss to grieve because you don't know exactly what that baby would have been like. So it's hard to let go of something that you never saw, or that might still be there, or that you might have a chance at some point later down the line. That's the world's most difficult kind of grieving. Step 2, you emerge into the world of adoption. You discover the many rules that may bar you from an adoption. You find out you have to be of a certain religion to adopt a kid over here. You have to be a full-time homemaker to adopt a kid over here. And you have to be under the age of 25 to get into the DPSS social system. And you run into 1,000 rules, which you can use to say, this is just too tough and I won't do it. And I'll do some other things with my life instead. Or, yes. The first step is accepting infertility and grieving the loss of having your own baby. That's step 1. Or if we look at Simon's 6 stages, that's making it through to the survivor stage before you start negotiating with adoption personnel.
Excuse me, are you talking these steps ideally if someone has moved through these other steps?
These are the ones that I'm recommending for if there's anyone in the room who's discovered their infertility and hasn't yet adopted and would like to. This is the journey that I think is the one that works the best from watching it in my office for many years. And there's 10 steps to making it through to having your own adopted baby. Step 2 is emerging into the world of adoption, we've talked about. Step 3 is being willing to become part of a minority. You are the 1 out of 5 that can't conceive, and you've gone public about it. And you're sending out 1,000 letters asking for if there is some little one out there who needs a home, and your home might be the right one for that little person. Friends and family get involved and unload all of their prejudice and impulsive thinking on you and tell you all kinds of things that they think you should or shouldn't do. And you are a new member of a new minority. Step 4 is you have to allow a third party into your marriage. You have to be willing to do that. You have to allow a birth mother and a birth father, maybe too, into your relationship. You have to negotiate with her.
What about the agency?
Yeah, what about the social worker?
If it's an agency adoption, the social worker's the frontline person, but I think the birth mother's right there behind her. If she's visible or invisible, she's there. She's the lady who's making your baby.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you forget about the birth mother, but it feels like there's more than just one other person in your marriage. It feels like the social worker, the agency, the birth mother,
lawyer, counselor.
counselor.
The physician that does the physical too. It's much larger than that. The one that goes over time is the birth family.
Yes, okay.
And often you end up with the grandparents of the birth or the parents of the birth mother who are very interested in where this child is being placed and want to know who you are and has her series of questions to ask. So you have to let these people into your marriage. You no longer have a private family. You get questions from agencies, you get questions from birth mothers, you have to evaluate your birth mother, and because there are so few babies available for adoption, you have to accept some pretty high-risk situations, and that's very hard to do. You get to feel excited, but that excitement is tempered with the fact that you may or you may not have that baby come into your home once the baby's born. Because a birth mother, no matter what she says throughout the pregnancy, can't really make a decision about relinquishing until she actually sees the baby that's been born to her. She can think she can, but she can't really make the decision. And those who are most firm all the way through the pregnancy are sometimes the ones that change their minds the most quickly when the birth happens. You have to be willing to give up control over the pregnancy. You can't feel the baby kick, you can't act pregnant, you can't get sick leave for being pregnant, and you can't control what the birth mother eats, drinks, or smokes. You have to give up control. And you need to conduct a relationship with the birth mother if you are doing one of the more open kinds of adoption. And that's a very special relationship because in many open adoptions, the relationship ceases after the baby's born or after the court hearing. So it's a temporary relationship of great depth and great meaning, but results in another loss. So you know you're going to have either one loss or two when the baby's born. Either you're going to have to give up your relationship with the birth mother, unless you go on to do a cooperative adoption, or you're going to lose both the birth mother and the baby. So it's a high-risk situation as you walk through these 10 steps, and the more you realize it, the better you'll be able to tolerate it. Yes?
I guess what I would like for you to do right now is to describe your definition of the difference between an open adoption and
Okay.
a cooperative adoption.
Good point. Okay. Let me do that.
We have open adoptions in which the relationship with the birth mother does go on, but we do not call them cooperative.
Cooperative adoptions. Okay, let me define the terms as I know them in Southern California through Parenting Resources, which is where I live, and that does not mean that those terms are the same in other parts of the country. But what I tend to call an open adoption is one in which the adoptive couple and the birth family have some contact before the baby is born, that the birth mother actually has some rights and privileges in selecting her adoptive family. She actually knows them. Here, the openness, if it's just an open adoption, that openness tends to close down often after the baby's born. And there's an agreement made that a letter will be sent once a year. It's kind of semi-over. A letter will be sent once a year, or there's a form signed that they can meet when the child turns of age if they both so wish. But basically, the ongoing contact stops. Often there's a series of letters that goes out right after the baby's born to reassure the birth mother that the baby's thriving. But the contact really, it moves apart. In a cooperative adoption in the state of California, what happens is that the birth mother and the adoptive couple and the birth father, if he is involved, and increasingly more so he is, form a relationship at the beginning, and that relationship continues after the birth as extended family. So that they may get together for traditional holidays, major celebrations, graduations, birthdays. If they live a long distance apart, they may see each other only once a year, but there are phone calls and letters. The birth mother is a known person to the adoptee throughout the adoptee's childhood. In Southern California, the birth mom seems to fit into the role of an aunt more than anything else. She's relinquished the parenting rights, but she is there, as an aunt would be, to talk about the adoption issues, to continue to be concerned about the adoptee, to give the adoptee presents at Christmas and birthday, to be available to the adoptee on an as needed or more important basis.
What percentage of adoptions follow that model?
I think the latest statistics I've heard is that about 70% of adoptions remain closed and they're gaining ground. About 30% of adoptions are now open, and somewhere between 5 to 10% of them are cooperative, with probably more cooperative who aren't saying so. So they're not hit the statistics yet. Because society is very much against it. They really frown upon it. There's a lot of prejudice against it. And they just prefer, and also they may feel a need to, because of the shame and the guilt, to not let anybody know that the child is an adoptee unless it's so blatantly obvious by different race, color, or creed. Question? There was a question over here?
Yeah. You're saying that 70% are closed adoption and they're gaining.
That's what Sharon Kaplan told me 2 months ago, that the closed adoption movement is gaining ground.
Well, I didn't know that there was a movement. I mean, I work at the county, of course.
She says that it's becoming a counter movement to the openness movement, and that it's gaining ground faster than the openness is. You wouldn't know that in this conference here, but the people who are here are already into openness, from what I can gather.
What is private adoption?
Private independent adoption is adoption that takes place outside of an agency setting. It usually is with an independent adoption lawyer.
Wouldn't it also depend on the region? I think that
Yes.
from state to state, so that 70%, I don't know what that means.
Think overall country.
in the whole country.
Yeah.
Well, there's some places that have not really had open adoption anyhow.
That's right. That's right. There are some states in which it's not, and California, the statistics would be very different.
Yes.
I think it probably would be somewhere around 40% closed, 50% open or cooperative. But it really depends. But if you look at the country as a whole, if you look at the country as a whole, they're saying 70%.
I'm not, who, an agency?
Some of the agencies have had more openness.
Well, that's, you got a little different story here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
One of my concerns in that has been, and I am an adoption worker, is how does the child truly deal with the two parents? In other words, all the feelings of anger and whatnot because you're here but you're not parenting me, etc. Do we have any statistics on that at all?
I'm not sure how it translates into numbers. You're addressing the comment that I made at the big session this morning, which is, let's not get so concerned about openness that we forget that there's a commitment that's gone on between the adoptive couple and the adoptee, and that they need to feel secure about that commitment too. I think probably the best way to answer your question is to the second half of this presentation gives you some actual real-life examples. I don't think it's an easy thing to do. I'm not proposing anything easy here. My sense is that adoptees, whether you present them with information about their birth families or not, have a fantasy world about them. And the fantasy world is often much more damaging than the reality that they could be presented with. And that fantasy world goes on regardless of whether you interact with them or not. If I have a choice as an adoptive mother, I would prefer to know what it is my adoptee fantasizes, and to be able to bring him some reality that we can share in a common kind of a way, and to talk about it more openly. And the adoption I'm going to be sharing with you in the next hour shows you some of the struggles that have gone on between an adoptive mom named Erica and a child named Rachel, disguised names, of course. So let's, maybe what I'll do, since we've got a ways to go with the other, is I'm going to just go real quickly through the last 7. We've gotten up to step 7, which is the birth. Okay. 5 was giving up control over the pregnancy.
And then relationship with the birth family.
What's 6?
6 is conducting a relationship with the birth family, the ability to do that. 7 is the birth, and I don't need to tell you all of the complexities and questions that come up around the birth. Who's going to be there? Who's not? Who's going to cut the cord? Who's going to put the clothes on? Who's going to hold the baby first? Where's the baby going to reside? Who's going to name the baby? How are you going to depart from the baby? It's a series of tremendously complex questions there.
I call it choreographic.
Good word for it. And then whatever the parties decided, the hospital steps in and changes anyway.
Right. Well, you have to train it.
And then you've got step 8 is waiting to see where the baby will reside. And that's an extremely hard stage in an open adoption in California. Birth mother has 6 months to change her mind.
What?
No.
What?
No.
No.
A court, yeah, the court.
Sorry, you're wrong.
Absolutely.
The difference is between an independent and an agency.
Right. That's what I said. In an independent adoption, which is the majority of adoptions here, she has 6 months in which, and it usually takes somewhere between 9 and 11 months to get into court. So you have that period of time where a telephone call could reclaim the child, and especially in the first 3 weeks, that's real tough, and the first 3 months. And the first 3 days are the times when that's most likely to occur. So the adoptive couple goes home with a new baby and the baby showers and everybody's congratulations, and they got one ear listened for the phone, and every time it rings is it the lawyer saying, birth mom would like to have
So
the
you're
baby
talking
back.
about even in an independent adoption, even after she signs the consent?
Right.
I would challenge that.
No, not after she signed.
Oh, no. No, with an independent adoption, she signs a consent. According, the county is supposed to take the consent within 45 days. The fact is, often it takes longer.
That's right.
But however, once she signs the consent, that's very strong.
No, but she can go
No,
back into court.
until it's finalized in court.
Incidentally, the judge doesn't even have to hear it if she goes into court.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. She wants to go back into court during that first 6 months period. She still has a really good chance. Okay.
She can't really even use abandonment at all.
If she did not sign it.
Okay. Let me let you argue about the details in the break. Okay. Step 9 is the adoption becomes final in court. And then there's a certain measure of a feeling of security that comes in that you will be able to be the parents of this child. This child will have a secure home, hopefully a secure home, and everybody can relax a little. But if that process takes 11 to 12, 13 months, for us it was 17 months. You're a primary caretaker for 17 months. It takes a long time to believe that a court appearance actually makes a difference emotionally. Let's stop there at this point and then resume. We're a little bit behind schedule, so we probably should take a stretch break. What, say again?
Number 10.
Oh, number 10 is adoption issues are resolved, and that step are resolved, and that issue, that step 10 takes 18 years.
No, I'd say more like about 40.
It goes in and out and up and down and back and forth. Let's take just a stretch break if you can hear. We've got, what? 3:15 or 3:30? 3:30. Anyone's willing can leave at 3:15 if they want to. Okay. What I would like to do is go on and share with you some pieces of one of the stories in my book called The Changing Nature of Adoption. And this particular story is entitled My Birth Family Cares Too. And it is the story of Erica and Alan, who are the adoptive couple. Julie is the birth mother, names disguised, and Rachel is the little girl. This adoptee started out with an open adoption, and the adoption became a cooperative one when she was about 3 years old. That is, she was reunited with her birth mother, her older brother, her younger sister, her grandmother and grandfather on the maternal side, an aunt, an uncle, and a cousin.
And how old was she again?
She was 3. She was 3. Since that time, the adoptive couple, Erica and Alan, have been in contact with birth family by phone. Every 2 to 3 weeks, they've met for major holiday celebrations, birthdays. They've met when there was a particular need for the adoptee, Rachel, to have contact with birth mother in relation to an adoption issue. The birth mother is an extraordinary birth mother in the sense of her ability not to compete for the parenting, but to provide a different relationship for this child, to provide the birth mother relationship. And I'm going to share with you some of the dialogues that occurred between Rachel and her adoptive mom, Erica, and her birth mother, Julie. Rachel is an acting out child. There are 2 kinds of adoptees as I see them walk into my office. There's either the over-adaptive type, which has made an existential decision to be very, 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 very good. And if they're very, very good, maybe rejection will never happen again. And it's hard to help them deal with their adoption issues because they're really busy being very, very good. And they often don't tell you their fantasies underneath. The actor-outer is a lot harder to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But you know when she's got an adoption issue. And Rachel is an actor-outer. And what she does when she is worried about an adoption issue is she will set up a test with the adoptive parents. She will do something rejecting or bad. She will invite them to reject her, kind of hope they do, and kind of hope they don't. And while she's doing this acting out behavior, she usually has no idea what it is that's troubling her. It's about a half a day later that the beautiful sentence comes out that explains the acting out that occurred before. Now, the process of this story is now about 220 pages and involves about 40 adoption issues that occurred for all of the adoption triangle members. Some of them were birth mother issues, some of them were adoptive couple issues, and some of them were adoptee issues. It's probably the first piece of writing that has really chronicled what those issues are for a young adoptee. I hope I can find some publisher who's interested in putting it into print, because whether you do a closed or an open or a cooperative adoption, I think that Rachel has taught us an awful lot about what those feelings are and what those questions are. I've picked out for you just 5 of them that represent each stage of the Simon's 6 stages. For an adoptee, I've added one more category, and it's what I call clarification/reunion. Because in addition to the denial, self-blame, victim, indignation, survivor, and integration, an adoptee has to get out there in the world and collect some information. They have to go out there and meet some people they've lost contact with. And I think that that requires another stage. In talking with many adoptive couples over the years in my office, these are the 8 qualifications that seem to come forward as those who are typically successful in providing an open adoption. I've noted that these people seem to have come to terms with their infertility to a reasonable degree. They're able to place their child's needs above their own. They've recognized the significant role of birth family in the child's sense of self. They have a strong sense of self. They have a basic belief that human nature is good. They have other sources of gratification besides parenting. They have a good sense of humor. They can laugh when they want to cry. And they have a strong support system. Now, before I get into the dialogues, I have one handout for you, which has a list of 17 steps that I think adoptive parents can take to help the adoptee with adoption issues. These collection of 17 things come from a book by Crenshaw on dealing with the bereavement process. They also come from watching Erica and Alan and Julie deal with Rachel. They come from adoptive couples who suggested them and carried them out in my office successfully. I think I don't have enough copies for everybody, so it's kind of first come, first served, but I'll read them to you. I think I have about 12, 15 copies here. The first is, some of them sound terribly obvious, but I think they're helpful when you put them all together. The first is to provide regular, consistent time with the adoptive parents. That is not a nanny, not the Boy Scout leader, but regular time with the adoptive parents really helps in the development of a self for an adoptee. An ability to coordinate with the teacher if adoption issues start disrupting the classroom. To provide regular contact with birth family, keeping lines of communication open between you and birth family during any time that the adoptee may need a break from the relationship so that they can go back if they need to. See to it that your adoptee has at least one stable, confiding relationship to talk with about adoption feelings. If it can't be you, find someone else. Be patient and show an ability to express empathy for your adoptee's pain and acting out. Easier said than done. 6, tell the adoptee that it is psychologically healthy to express adoption feelings. 7, make use of storytelling and symbolic play. 8, model expression of your own feelings. 9, yeah, and I think there's enough copies here, so if you want one, you don't have to write it down. Help with the grieving of the loss of birth family, and help the adoptee to take a break from the grieving. Children grieve in small little pieces. They can't handle it for very long, and they need permission to stop being upset about it and to go out and play ball for a couple of days and then come back and deal with it again. Help the adoptee to go on with life. The strength and the competence gained from grieving appropriately needs to be recognized, or recognize the survivor skills that the adoptee has acquired. Encourage your adoptee to actualize fantasies that can be achieved and relinquish dreams that can't happen. I think we can find your birth mother. I understand that your birth father is dead and you're never going to be able to see him. There's no way I can arrange that for you. To help them give up what they can't find. Help them get what they can get. Allow an adoptee to adopt a pet so they can experience the position of adoptive parenting. Find other adoptees for your adoptee to be with. Share family time with other adoptive families. One of the things Rachel wondered, since she was in 4 years of school, there wasn't another adoptee in her class. In her world, there was not another adoptee, which made her very strange to herself. And one of the things Erica had to do was to go out and find some adoptive families to play with regularly. Allow psychological consultation with a professional specializing in adoption. I underline, do not see a therapist who does not know about adoption, because they don't know what they're talking about, and they can say some terribly wrong things. So the first question you need to ask them on the telephone is, do you have a specialty in the field of adoption? And if you don't, could you refer me to someone who does? Do not be ashamed to reach out for help. 15, spell each other when you lose it. Spell each other when you lose it with your adoptee. That is, the adoption issues or the acting out has just gotten to a frustration level where you're afraid you're going to hit or strike out or kill. You know, have a signal with your spouse that you step back and he steps in, or you step in and he steps out. Minimize long periods of time when adoptive parents are away from the adoptee, if the adoptee is under the age of 7. Long vacations, leaving the adoptee with grandmother or nanny or babysitter are real hard on adoptees because of the loss issues. When you have a grounded sense of self, it's easier for them to handle your going away. And you need to handle prejudice against openness from your friends, and to take that burden off your adoptee's shoulders, because they're not old enough to take it on. If that list is useful to any of you, feel free to take one at the end of the session, but those are some of the things that have been helpful to the adoptees I've been in contact with. Now let's turn to some of the dialogues between Rachel and her adoptive family. Rachel is an individual. Every adoptee is different. The issues that she needed to answer may not be the issues that every adoptee needs to answer. They're an example of a precocious kid who appears to need to know everything she can get her hands on. Not all adoptees need that, nor should they. But if you have a precocious kid, you've got a big job on your hands, as Erica did. Here's an example of what I would consider to be the self-blame stage. It's entitled, it's a subheading of, Did my birth mommy leave me because she was angry with me? Okay? Alan planned to go to Chicago for 3 days to present a paper. He told Rachel several days before he left. Shortly before his departure, Rachel had a toilet training accident on the kitchen floor. She was about 3 then. On purpose, as her way of expressing her displeasure at his departure. I had just cleaned up. By the way, the story is written in first person, Erica talking.
Is Erica the birth mom or the adoptive mom?
Erica's the adoptive mom. Julie is the birth mom. You really need 4 names here. Rachel's the child. Erica and Alan are the adoptive parents. And Julie is the birth mother. I had cleaned up, but the floor was still wet when Alan walked into the room. He slipped and fell, breaking a small bone in his foot. He went to Chicago on crutches, understandably upset. Alan and I used this opportunity to ask Rachel to use her words instead of her behavior to let us know what she feels. She behaved well while he was gone and asked him on the phone each night if his foot was better. When he arrived home, she tested limits with naughty behavior more than usual. with additional accidents. Each time her daddy went away to work, she wanted to know if he was going to Chicago again. After 4 days of this, I decided to ask, were you worried that Daddy went away because he was mad at you, because he hurt his foot? She buried her head in my shoulder shyly and said, yes. I assured her, Daddy never goes away when he's mad. He tells us about his feelings instead. He only went to give a paper. We told Daddy, and he reassured Rachel too. But she didn't seem to calm down. The limit testing continued sporadically. One evening we were sitting at the dining room table. Rachel was playing with her food instead of eating. I was sad when she left me. I cried, she blurted, seemingly out of nowhere. Who is she? I asked, puzzled. Oh, are you talking about your birth mother? What is her other name? Said Rachel. Her name is Julie, I answered. Suddenly I had an idea, and I asked, are you afraid that Daddy went away because he was mad at you, and your birth mother left you at the hospital because she was angry with you too? She nodded her head and then put it down on the table, sinking into her seat with obvious relief. We finally understood. She looked troubled. She moved over to my lap and I held her tight. Oh no, she did not leave you because she was mad. She loves you. She planned to give you to us even before you were born. You didn't do anything to make her angry. She gave you to us because she wanted you to have everything you needed. She couldn't give you those things herself then. She wanted you to have lots of mommy time and daddy time and food and clothes and toys. She knew we could give it to you. Do you understand? Nod, but Rachel's head was still lowered, looking very serious and concerned. It's hard to have a birth mother and a mommy, isn't it? Rachel continued. It's hard to understand. You are doing a wonderful job of asking questions. Whenever you have a question or a worry, you ask me or Daddy. We understand more about your adoption. My heart ached for her. Her pain seemed as difficult as the pain of my infertility. I was not prepared for her next question. Does she know where I am now?
This is the end of Tape A. Please continue on to Tape B. The American Adoption Congress presents the 13th International Conference, April 11th to the 14th, 1991, in Garden Grove, California. This is program number D151, Tape 6B.
How to reach us. She wants to know that you are doing well. She won't come to visit you until you want her to. Alan had gone to get the babysitter for the evening. They both walked into the room, interrupting any further conversation. I took Rachel aside and said, does that answer your worries for now? That's enough for now, she sighed. She seemed very grown up. You are a big girl to be able to ask so many good questions. You can ask more and more until you understand. Remember, no one left you because they were mad. No one is going to take you away from us. We will raise you. Could my assurance really help? Okay? I think that's a dialogue about self-blame. Happened with a 3.5-year-old. That conversation occurred during the time that the adoptive couple had made contact with birth family. And they were negotiating the relationship with each other, but they hadn't yet told Rachel because they were still working out reestablishing contact. And she came forward with this dialogue. Okay. Let's look at an example of what I call reunion clarification. This is the conversation that occurred directly before Rachel met her birth family. Her birth family had been invited to come for lunch, and they had all decided to come, all of them, the grandparents and the aunts, the uncles, and the adoptive family felt that it was too much for Rachel to meet all of these people at once. So they had arranged for her to go and play with a friend, and then they were going to introduce her to birth family more slowly. That was the adoptive parents' way of doing it. Rachel put a change in the plans, as you will see shortly. During the week before the scheduled lunch, Rachel asked for the first time to see her other family. She picked up a photograph of a mother and 2 children. "This is my brother and sister," she said. "No, that is someone else. Would you like to see pictures of your brother and sisters?" "No, I want to see them." We had made arrangements for Rachel to play with a friend. After lunch, "Would you like to meet Julie in the park and show her how you climb on the monkey bars?" "And my brother and sister too. I want to see them too." "Yes, if that's what you would like." Rachel then said, "I want to stay with you while you have lunch. I'm not going out to play with anyone else." "Well, we are having your birth mother and her new family and your grandmother and granddaddy and cousin and aunt. Do you want to meet all those people at once?" "Yes, I want to stay with you at home." "That would be fine. Take some time to think about it and make sure that's what you want. We would like to have you stay with us if that's what you really want to do." She did stay, and birth family arrived, and then the grandparents arrived, and there were a number of grown-ups standing on the porch wondering what to do next, because we'd all been informed that birth grandfather was very upset about the adoption, and we were afraid that he was going to break down at the moment that he met the adoptive couple, and the adoptive couple and the birth family were really concerned about how to accomplish this meeting. Again, Rachel, the adoptee, took the matter into her own hands. Next, the grandparents arrived. Julie had warned us that grandfather was very involved with his grandchildren. Therefore, he might feel some deep emotion. Without any apparent hesitation, Rachel took the situation in hand while the adults were still standing on the porch, wondering what to do. Rachel walked out in the driveway right up to the car door. As grandfather opened it, she said, "Hello, grandfather." He blinked with astonishment and then said hello back quietly. He reached into the back seat for a soft doll, but Rachel was already on her way to the other side of the car. "Hello, Grandma," she said. Grandma picked her up and hugged her as if they had known each other for a long time. Rachel squirmed down and they walked into the house holding hands. Rachel's actions showed such quiet confidence and determination. I was simply floored. Did our conversations about her birth family help her to master and enjoy these important moments? I think that's a good example of how much harder it is to do things when you're grown up than when you're kids in some ways, and that the adoptees know what kind of precocious lead to take, and that often we can trust them.
Was she 3 at this time as well?
3.5. It's about 3.5. She, don't think we have time to read all of this, but she then moved into a position of defending her adoptive mom, Erica, in a way. She, for a while, kept her distance from her birth mom, but then when Erica and Julie were standing together talking, Erica approached and climbed up Rachel approached and climbed up into Erica's arms, and Erica put her hands on Erica's breasts and said to Julie, "My mommy has breasts too." Which I think, "Of course she does," answered Julie cheerfully. And I think that was Rachel's way of setting the record straight. She was saying that her adoptive mom couldn't make a baby, but the rest of her was in definitely good working order. So you can see these issues as they just come tumbling out when you give a child access to the most important question that that Rachel needed to ask Julie was whether she would be staying with her adoptive family. She was afraid that her birth mother would take her away, and she didn't want that to happen. And so she asked her birth mother rather early in the meeting whether she would be staying with her adoptive family. Her birth mother was primed for the question. The adults had talked, and she said, "I will never, never, never take you away, but I like to know who you are and to visit you sometimes." So that issue was handled right up front. That's an example of reunion clarification. I'm going to have to skip some of these, so I'm going to skip one and go on to indignation. Here's a really good example that occurred for Erica and Alan at about 2:30 in the morning. Another psychological storm struck suddenly in the middle of the night. Rachel awoke angry and knocked a toy off her bedside table. It was hard to comfort her because she would not talk. I tucked her in and went back to bed. Again the toy was knocked off, followed by a larger crash as she pulled over a small bedside table. Alan and I leapt out of bed. This time we turned on the lights and insisted that she wake up enough to talk with us. I curled up with Rachel in a big soft rocking chair and told her she could not go back to bed until we talked. Alan watched, huddled in his bathrobe in another chair across the room. His presence helped me to keep going calmly instead of getting angry. Are you very, very mad? I asked. Nod. Are you mad about being adopted? Nod. Do you need to talk with Julie? No. Is it very hard not to stay with her? Yes. Do you feel like there is something wrong with you? And that makes you mad? It didn't matter who was in Julie's tummy, whether the baby was a boy or a girl, or little or big, or fat or thin. She knew she would not be able to raise another child when you were born. And we were very sad because we could not make a baby. We met and helped each other out. You came to us. That is the way it is and will always be. Does it help just a little bit for us to say that we love you? Makes me sad. Nod. Sometimes it's just going to be painful to be adopted. But you will have to decide what kind of girl you are going to be. You can be as fine a girl as you want to be. It doesn't matter whether you are adopted or not. Long pause as she relaxed her body in my arms. Can I go back to bed now? Can you rest more peacefully? I will not let you hurt your things because they belong to you. Yes, bed now. We tucked her in and returned to bed. I lay awake until I was sure that she was asleep. I hated these storms, but I felt glad that she was able to share them with us. I couldn't bear it if she had to fight these battles entirely on her own. They were too big for any 4-year-old. I wondered if I wished that she could have grown inside me by some magic, but I refused to indulge myself in cursing my infertility one more time. This was our reality. Rachel's strength and individuality would come from dealing with it. I would help her, but felt no inclination to rescue her with a fairy tale godmother wish. I think that shows Erica moving in up the notch into survival and integration, and Erica dealing with, and Rachel dealing with her pain about being adopted.
Do you work with the whole family?
This is actually a very dear friend of mine whom I've known for years and years, and she asked me to write the story because I'm a writer and she's not. And so I have recorded the dialogues, and what's happened is that every time there has been a major adoption issue, she calls me up and I plug in the tape recorder. So this is pretty fresh off the press stuff. And I've recorded the whole story for her throughout this past 4 years.
Because it sounds like the mother, is able to, tap into these issues for her daughter in, I think, a very profound way. And I wonder whether that's something that, one can assume that parents can do so easily or so, what seems readily.
That's a really good question. I think that what happens, or at least what happened for Erica, is that once she and Alan allowed the cooperative adoption to happen, the issues fell out naturally. And she was a part of the experiences that were happening with a cooperative family, so that she acquired a better and better skill to figure out what her kid was feeling. There were, and you will see, there's some author commentaries in this book that deals with the struggle that Erica had to go through to make it through these stages to be able to not act out back with her child. and to keep her patience and not yell at her and not get angry and
That's what I would
to stay.
expect.
Well, Erica did plenty of that. And Erica grew and learned and is doing much less of it. There is no perfect parenting when you deal with such complex issues. The thing I respect about her was her ability to keep on learning, to keep on questioning. Here's a short little vignette that I think is a good example of a survivor, just to move into a slightly happier place. Rachel provided occasional beautiful moments of resolution as she articulated her feelings about her adoption. We were headed off to school one sunny May morning. In her enthusiasm for the warm, sunny day, she jumped off a rock, slipped, and fell. After medicine and a Band-Aid, I got her into the car, kissed her on the top of her head, and said reassuringly, "It's hard to be 3 sometimes, isn't it? All 3-year-olds get a lot of bumps. You'll be okay, sweetie." As I got into the car, she said, "Sweetie is a word you use when you are in a family." "That's right," I said, surprised, "and you belong to the Bridges family." Then she added, "A family is where you be so you don't feel lost." "That's right," I said again. She had not finished. "A family is where there is someone to fix your owie, right?" I thought I would cry. She was understanding that she belonged with us. I was so glad. These moments of resolution often lasted for weeks at a time, and then Rachel was off to another adoption issue. In between the adoption issues, this is an active, sunny, social, confident child. When the adoption issues come through, it's a storm. And they used to take, the acting out used to involve a couple of days. Now it involves half an hour. It's gotten a lot better as she understands more. Here's a beautiful example of integration from a 4-year-old, which 4-year-olds can do it. It's still not too late for us to do it. It was a cold winter, so I took Rachel to the store to get some sweaters. She took her baby doll from Julie with her and would have none of my warm clothes. I offered to buy for her. We didn't have a lot of choice since the spring clothes were already coming onto the racks. At one point she said too loudly, "You aren't my mother, so you can't buy me anything." 3 other mothers looked at me, curious about our fight. I responded quickly, "I am your mother, and I will see to it that you are warmly dressed." We left the store quickly, and I picked her up in my arms. "Look, you will always be adopted, and I will always be your adoptive mommy. We have to find a way to live with this fact without hurting each other too much. Can I help you by answering a question? Does Julie ever get mad at Nathan and send him to his room?" Nathan's her older brother. "Yes, they have times when they disagree with each other too. Were you hoping that Julie could be a perfect mother?" "Yes." "No one can be a perfect mother. I can't, Julie can't. There are hard days at our house and hard days at Julie's house, and good days at our house and good days at Julie's house. You can't be perfect?" "No, I can't. I try to do a good job, but I can never be perfect. Can you be perfect?" "Yes." "Really? Are you being perfect today?" "Yes." "No, I don't think you are. Instead, you are worried and rude to me." Julie told me that she was glad you were living with us because her house is sometimes not as happy as she would like it to be. Sometimes she and her husband get too angry with each other. She doesn't want you to be in the middle of it. "Well, what about my brother?" She worries about him too. Finally, I was able to buy 2 sweaters for her. But there's an integration of nobody's perfect, this thing happened, it's not her fault, it's not adoptive parents' fault, it's not the kid's fault, it happened. It's a combination of complex experiences. Here's another one. That's an integration. Let's pick a victim one. Did the judge order you to love me? That's one of the dialogues. Rachel continued to sort out in her mind just how it was that she came to live in the Bridges family. Her questions would just pop out every couple of days. "Did the man in the black robe order you to love me?" she asked Alan. "Oh no, no one told us to love you. We just decided to do that all by ourselves, way before we met the judge." "Well, you're a real daddy, aren't you?" "You bet I am. I'm your daddy." Next question. "Some parents are really bad parents. They wait until their kids goes to sleep and then they throw them out the window, right?" I said, "Yes, sometimes we have bad parents. But if you are an adoptee, the chances are that you will get a good parent." I can't always say that's totally true, but that was something that was said to her at that point by Ellen. "Because the judge makes sure that your birth mommy has selected a good home for you. Since you were too young to choose your parents, he helped you select your mom and dad." Yeah, I could only say goo-goo. "The judge asked us to answer a lot of questions and send a lady to our home to see how we took care of you. He even made us bring you to the courtroom so he could see if you were healthy and how you liked being with us. If you were unhappy and tried to run away, or if we were mean to you, he would not have let you live with us." There's a kid who's saying, "Am I just a victim of whatever other people want to do with me, whether they're good or bad parents, whether they're adoptive parents or birth parents? Or does somebody have some control over something here?" Of course, there's lots more to say about it, but I think in being Erica's close friend and in helping her record this journey that she's taken with Rachel through these 3 or 4 years, I could see that she had come up with a way to make a difference. She had resolved her infertility enough to open herself up to allow this child to really open up with her. And the child was young enough not to have been shut up by societal rules and all the ways in which we tell children to keep quiet and behave properly. And so I think Rachel is a rare example of how many adoption issues can come forward. There were a whole lot more of them. There's about 30. I've just given you 4. And I think we've got about 4 minutes left, and I wish we had a little more time to talk about it. Do I have any comments or questions before we stop? Yes?
Oh, this appears to be a rather ideal situation, and I know in my job I work with extremely damaged parents and parents who the child is extremely fearful. Have you had experience working with that kind of a parent, and how does that work out in that kind of situation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. This is I think a high-functioning adoptive couple who negotiated. Erica's put in hours on the phone with her birth mother, and given the birth mother a lot. This is a lady who's, from what I can gather, basically a good parent, but is unable to hold a job or continue a relationship with a man. So she continues to be on welfare and whatnot, and continues not to make it forward into that kind of next step. She has an older. She has a son, and then the loss of Rachel was so painful to her that out of wedlock she did conceive another little girl to take her place. So Rachel has an older brother and a younger sister. And Rachel, just this past Easter, went to visit her birth family with Erica and Alan, and they were all in the low tenement housing together with a lot of other kids around who weren't being very well parented, and the Easter Bunny and the whole bit. And I think my experience in Sharon Kaplan's is really the same, and that is, regardless of what dysfunctions occur in terms of the work world or the relationship world or the drug world or the divorce world, all those ways we adults can get into trouble, it is possible to zero in on helping a single individual with their adoptee pain. And that when two parties who are equally interested in the welfare of that child get together, that for that single purpose alone, they can behave quite admirably. But if you tried to put them together all the time, we probably run into a lot more complexity. But remember, this is a clarification reunion situation that happens about once a month, every 6 weeks, for perhaps a half a day to maybe a day. Rachel, I think, has spent one night with her birth family. Yeah.
You alluded earlier to the fact that Erica had spent hours on the phone with Julie, the birth mother. What kinds of things would they talk about?
The adoption issues that were going on, how the birth mother was doing with parenting her kids, how her kids were feeling about the adoption of Rachel, when they would next meet, whether the birth mother had a car that month and whether the adoptive couple needed to go there instead, how to handle the Easter basket for this year, who would do the candy and who would do the basket part, what to do about Santa Claus, who would provide the stockings, who would provide the other presents. And this year, Erica and Alan and birth family got together for Christmas, and they saw to it that there were 5 presents under the tree for each child. And none of the children ever checked the tags to see what was from birth mommy, what was from the adoptive mommy, what was from Santa Claus. It was just one big family. But it took a lot of talking on the part of Erica and Julie to pull that kind of cooperation off. And they're cooperating on this one single issue. They aren't trying to be best of friends or work together or do, in other ways they're very, very mismatched. But in this one particular issue, they've been able to work really well together, I think. And birth mother is always on good behavior because she's afraid that if she misbehaves, that the adoptive couple will shut down the adoption. And I think adoptive couples hold too much power that way. Though I think over the years she's become more and more relaxed and she's just freer to be herself.
You mean that the birth mother fears that the child will be given back to her?
No. The birth mother fears that she would do something the adoptive couple didn't like and the adoptive couple would take the child away and not let her see her anymore. Yeah. I guess we're breaking up time. Thank you all for coming.